Welcome to the Global News Podcast from the BBC. I'm Pete Ross. With me today is the BBC's diplomatic correspondent, Paul Adams. Paul, thanks for joining us. Let's dive right in. After more than 6 weeks of conflict, Iran and the US have agreed a 2-week ceasefire, both sides claiming victory. But how can that be?
I think, the thing to remember is that both sides need to be able to call this a victory for their own audiences and for their own sense of esteem and self-worth and all the rest of it. From the United States point of view, there's a pretty phenomenal list of things that they have achieved over the course of this past month, along with their Israeli allies. There was a press conference in which Pete Hegseth and his military counterpart rattled off a whole long list of things that they've done. 80% of Iran's air defenses, hundreds of missile and drone facilities, 2,000 command and control nodes, 90% of weapons factories all destroyed. They clearly believe that they have dealt a phenomenal blow to Iran. From Iran's point of view, the regime, and it is still fundamentally the same regime with the same ideology, that survives. And it has achieved a stranglehold over the Strait of Hormuz, which has not yet been completely dealt with in terms of Iran's ability to exert control, whether it's military control or force people to pay tolls to go through. We'll have to see how that issue is resolved. We don't know what a future sort of protocol will mean. But the very fact that it is still there and it has demonstrated to the world that it has this weapon, this ability to choke off traffic through one of the world's most important waterways, that is a significant achievement for the Iranian regime.
You talk about some fairly significant sticking points there, and we'll get into those in more details in a moment. But what exactly has been agreed by both sides to get us to this 2-week ceasefire right now?
Well, in a sense, nothing has yet been agreed. All that has been agreed is that the guns will fall silent. And yes, there's been a slightly messy beginning to the ceasefire with the Iranians continuing to fire. Interestingly, Pete Hegseth was quite sanguine about that. He said it's going to take a while for the message to get through to all the units. And I think one of the points the Americans make is that the command and control is so fragmented now in Iran that not everyone necessarily is getting the message rapidly. The Strait of Hormuz will open, although the Iranians are saying that it's going to be in coordination with the Iranian military and with due considerations of technical limitations. That was the phraseology used by Iran's foreign minister. We don't know exactly what that means. But so that is fundamentally all that has been achieved so far, and a possible agreement for the two sides to meet in Pakistan to start talking about the nitty-gritty. Although so far, I think we only have the Iranians saying that they're definitely going to be there.
Paul, 4 weeks ago, Donald Trump was demanding an unconditional surrender from Iran. Now he said that he's going to take a 10-point plan put forward by the Iranians as a basis of negotiation. So where do we go from here? What's actually in that 10-point plan?
Well, there are various versions of that around, so that's the first thing to say. But they all include elements like complete cessation of the war, not just in Iran, but also across the region, including, crucially, in Lebanon, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, the full payment of compensation for damage done in the course of the war, the lifting of sanctions on Iran, the release of frozen Iranian assets held in the United States and elsewhere, and with Iran fully committing to not seeking possession of a nuclear weapon while retaining the right under the terms of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to enrich uranium for civilian use. That essentially is the outline of the plan. We have these two documents. One is the 10-point plan, and as I say, there are a few versions of that knocking around this morning. And the other is the 15-point American document, which was released a little over 2 weeks ago. Again, not formally released, and we haven't got a kind of, an authoritative version of that. But that essentially read like a kind of surrender document where Iran had to give up everything and didn't get a whole lot in return. Somewhere in the midst of all of that is the deal that will be done. The question is, can that be done in the 2 weeks? And it is only 2 weeks of time available before this ceasefire runs out.
What do you think might be the biggest sticking point? I guess perhaps the Strait of Hormuz, or on the US side, this idea that they want the uranium out of the country, the enriched uranium.
I think, look, these are both huge issues, the nuclear issue and the Strait of Hormuz. One, an issue that we've been aware of and talking about for decades. The other, something that has just come up in the course of this war as a really crucial issue. On the Strait of Hormuz, essentially what the Iranians are saying is you need to recognize our sovereignty over that water and that we have a right to control and have authority over the traffic that moves through that waterway. Now, that is totally anathema to, frankly, the rest of the world. Certainly the Gulf states, which rely on it for the export of their petroleum and other products, are deeply unhappy at the notion that Iran, as a result of this war, will have established some kind of right to determine what goes through that waterway. So that is something that is going to have to be dealt with. On the nuclear issue, in one sense, the Americans seem to believe that they've done so much damage, both last year in the 12-day war, Operation Midnight Hammer, which dealt this very substantial series of blows to key nuclear facilities, and to a lesser extent during the course of the past month as well, where nuclear sites have been hit. They believe that Iran's program has been pushed back very considerably. Now, there is the question of the fate of this 440 kilograms of highly enriched uranium thought to be under the rubble at Isfahan. The Americans are being asked about that a lot. It's what Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth both refer to as the dust. There is a feeling that it is buried. It is possibly rather inaccessible. The Americans say we're watching that 24/7. And that one way or another, it'll either remain buried or we will have it. In other words, the Iranians will be forced to give it up. Now, there was a talk of a deal, but just before, literally in the 24 hours or 48 hours before this war broke out, brokered by the Omanis. And they were incandescent when the war broke out because they said, look, we had a deal which addressed all of these issues. It was on the table. It was ready to be signed. And the Americans simply didn't understand it or chose not to understand it and chose to go to war instead. That deal would address the issue of the highly enriched uranium in one way or another, whether it would be down blended, to use the technical term, to get it back down to a level of low enrichment, or taken out of the country, or just dealt with in some way or another. But that Iran would insist on its continued right to enrich uranium for civilian purposes. Now, that goes to the heart of the issue which has divided the world about Iran's nuclear ambitions for such a long time. Does Iran want to hold on to that right because it wants to build a bomb at some point in the future? Or is it going to be can we trust it to use that for purely civil purposes? The JCPOA, the deal that was done during the Obama years, did address all of that, thought it had successfully tackled that issue. It was deemed to be the worst deal in history by Donald Trump and his supporters. But we may have to get back to something that is a little bit akin to that if the United States is going to agree to Iran's continued right to enrich uranium. Pete Hegseth was asked about that at the press conference today, and frankly, he dodged the question, merely saying that Iran would have no nuclear capability. That is not the same as saying that Iran would have no nuclear enrichment.
We've heard a lot recently about the fact from the US side that they say, Washington says, that there has been significant regime change. Some might say that might not be the case.
Well, look, there's a long list of people who have been killed, just as there is a long list of military facilities that have been bombed. Everyone from the Supreme Leader on down. And we still have not seen or heard directly from the new Supreme Leader, the old Supreme Leader's son. So in one sense, there has been a change of personnel. Does that amount to regime change? Well, you've heard in American rhetoric in the last week or so from Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth and others, a constant reference to a changed regime. They want the world, primarily perhaps the American audience, to believe that what they have done has fundamentally changed the Iranian regime. And that it has learned lessons from the past month that will be reflected in its course going forward. I think most other people would say this is a regime that is fundamentally organized in the same way, has the same structures, has the same ideology, the same determination to confront the United States and Israel, and that we have seen very little so far to suggest that it is going to be a different kind of regime going forward. That would have to involve a changed attitude on its nuclear program, and crucially, from Israel's point of view, a changed behavior on the regional front. An end to its sponsoring of proxies and allies around the Middle East, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and so forth. All of that is still to be tested. For everything that we see for the time being, it is still the same regime.
What's Israel's role in this? It's declared support for this 2-week ceasefire, but that's also as it's continued to launch attacks on Hezbollah in Lebanon. So could they possibly derail the whole thing?
Well, they are clearly saying that they are not part of this deal. In a statement from the Israeli government today, there is the stark phrase, the 2-week ceasefire does not include Lebanon. Now, that runs absolutely counter to what the Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif was saying. And again, I'm quoting, the United States of America, along with their allies, have agreed to an immediate ceasefire everywhere, including Lebanon. So we've not heard anything from Washington to suggest that they take issue with Benjamin Netanyahu's determination to carry on the fight in Lebanon. I suspect that there is some understanding of Israel's desire to deliver a significant, lasting blow to Hezbollah once and for all. I think there will be a lot of attention on how Israel continues to prosecute this campaign, because it has been hugely costly for the people of Lebanon already, and promises to be even more costly as the Israeli military goes in and destroys villages wholesale. That could become a bone of contention between Israel and the United States, particularly if it threatens further retaliation from elsewhere, whether it's the Houthis, in the Red Sea, or indeed the Iranians themselves. So that's definitely one to watch.
Sounds like we're at a very significant moment, but with lots of unknowns as the next 2 weeks progresses.
A huge number of unknowns. And I think one thing that is, we're going to need to see some intensive diplomacy. And I think one of the things that worries observers is that the Americans have yet to show that they are willing to kind of throw the required diplomatic resources at solving these issues. Its ability and its determination to throw military resources is being very, very vividly demonstrated over the past month. But they've not shown a willingness to kind of invest in the time and effort and detail required to deal with these issues. If they don't, then none of the issues that we've just talked about will actually have been properly resolved.
Thanks, Paul. Our diplomatic correspondent, Paul Adams. If you'd like to hear more from the Global News Podcast, click the link below. Thanks for joining us.